All right, welcome everybody to the 35th Annual California Small Farm Conference. My name is Evan Wigg. I'm with Community Alliance of Family Farmers, and we're excited to have you here. And we're going to be talking today about defensible space and infrastructure protection for the farm and ranch. And with that, I am going to pass it on to our wonderful panel today. Starting, we'll hand it over to you, Amber.
Excellent. Thanks, Evan. Appreciate that. Love that little intro video. Welcome, everyone. You may have seen a different version of this presentation because we did an hour-and-a-half one a few months back. And so this will be our elevator speech version. And just while folks are logging in and getting settled, I'll be your timekeeper. Just want to cover some basic housekeeping items, like using the Q&A function for your questions so it doesn't get lost in the chat if that's for the panelists. And we'll have different folks monitoring the chat as best as we can to make sure those get pulled in. And this content can be kind of traumatic for folks who've been through wildfires. So we just want to say that we're going to cover some of that content. Take care of yourself. If you need to step away, that's totally fine. And we'll also be launching a couple of different polls and a survey at the end. So please stay tuned for all of that great info that helps us improve future iterations. Without further ado, yes, excellent. So I would like to hand it over to Luca, who is leading this, but I just want to mention that I shamelessly solicited him from the new growing body of fire advisors throughout the state from the UCCE and our system to be on our Wildfire Advisory Council. And so between Luca and Zach, who I also solicited from different interactions through Farmer Campus training, have both joined us to create this content, and we're all kind of co-presenting and supporting each other in this space.
Hello, everybody. And just going to give a quick introduction. I'm a fire advisor with the UC Agriculture and Natural Resources, and I'm based at the South Coast Research Center in Irvine, but I cover the region of Southern California. Zach, do you want to go next?
Yeah, so I am a partner at Good Hummus Produce in Yolo County, and I also work as a fire captain with CAL FIRE, also in Yolo County. So a lot of stuff is very near and dear to my heart, and I'd like to see people do a great job with defensible space.
And Dom?
Thank you. Yeah, hi, I'm Dom. I'm a Grizzly Corps fellow with the Community Alliance of Family Farmers, and I'll just be here to support in the chat and stuff to that extent.
All right.
Excellent. I skipped over myself a little bit. I'm sorry, but I'm Amber Schat, and I'm the Wildfire Resilience Specialist CAFF in our new Wildfire Resilience program. And this is not about our program, but this is about some of the tailored content that we're producing through that program and that effort. So if you are curious about that, Dom and I will be presenting that information at the CARCD conference, virtual conference on March 8th. So yeah.
All right. Thank you all. And I guess we can start with a quick overview about fires, how fires spread, and how structures burn. And this overview will be useful to understand better what you can do in terms of hardening of the structures or defensible space. And in general, whenever you have a fire, could be a wildfire, but also a fire generated on your property from, I don't know, a power tool or something like that. And fires can approach structures in different ways. And for example, if you have a lot of flammable material in proximity of the structure, you can create a direct path for the fire to spread to the structure. Or whenever you have burning vegetation or other materials, they tend to generate embers. And embers fly really well with wind. They can fly even miles away from the front of the fire. So, and usually they tend to land on the roof or wherever the leaves tend to accumulate whenever you clean them around the house. So, and also we have radiant heating whenever you have a structure, for example, a shed with a lot of flammable materials inside. Whenever they burn, they can generate a lot of heat and ignite structures that are close by. And keep in mind that all of these three mechanisms happen at the same time. There is not one or the other, but depending on your situation, there might be some aspects that you might want to focus on.
And I just want to
yeah,
pause
sorry.
you really quick because we didn't get a
Yep.
chance to launch our polls yet, but we do want to kind of
Oh.
see who is in the session with us, if that's okay. So we're going to launch just a couple polls. Just do your best. Some of them are going to, just describe your role and your primary role. So just a single choice there. And then the second one is what's your relationship with Wildfire? And you can choose as many as are applicable, but generally like your top three are the best for us just to understand who we're working with and how to serve this information better to those different demographics. And you might hear that I live on a ranch, so there's some turkeys and chickens doing their thing in the background.
Yeah, we can leave the poll open for a little longer.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, sorry about that. I forgot about it.
No, we weren't ready. It's all good. Excellent. Thanks everyone who's participating in that. That's very useful for us.
I'll add in, Luca, on this slide. The ember is a little bit less intuitive to most folks on how to defend their house, and that's kind of what some of this presentation will go over. Is the emphasis on how dangerous those embers coupled with that wind actually is. Defensible space is kind of well documented and well out there in the public eye, but the embers and even the radiant heat is a little bit less known amongst the public, and from the fire department side, we see that quite a bit where those embers are what's really doing a lot of damage these days on these catastrophic wildfires.
Yep, that's right. And we'll see an example in a video later.
Great. So everybody should be able to see that. And it's awesome to see that we've got some farmer rancher presence dominating. So this is really exciting too, because hopefully you'll be the ones to participate in our eval at the end and tell us whether or not this really is landing in a way that's useful for y'all. And then almost everyone has had it occur or knows someone who's been impacted. And I find it really interesting to look at this information because this is like, if you're actually in a room full of people, you don't realize like everyone has had some sort of impact, whether that's smoke, direct exposure, family affected. So it's just great. Keep having this conversation with people in your community because everybody can contribute to that discussion. Thanks, y'all. Oh, and we forgot to say this, but we can't directly chat you. Go ahead and introduce yourselves if you'd like in the chat. Tell us where you're from, what your role is, and what you're hoping to get out of this.
Yeah,
without further ado.
If we don't have enough time to answer the questions, we'll be happy to answer them later on by email or contact. All right. Okay, so as I mentioned, here we have 2 videos of 2 very different fires, but with similar outcomes. And the one on the left happened in Texas in July of 2022. And here you can see that the fire started from a road, like there was a road ignition and it spread through the grass and reached this residential community. And this is a great example, unfortunately, of flame contact, because you can see that how the fire spread through the grass, and eventually from the grass, it jumps to the fence. And then the fences create like this direct path for the fire to like spread between the houses. And here you can see the flame front that is creeping towards the structure. And then the fire from the fence jumps to the shed. And then the shed probably has a lot of flammable materials, and within 10 minutes is completely burned. And these big flames eventually ignite the roof of the house next by. And it's a little hard to see here, but if you focus, you could probably see smoke and some flames that start from the roof. Here you see the smoke coming out of the vents. And in that case, the fire is already inside the house and very likely is a complete loss. And on the other side here, it's a completely different fire happened in Orange County in May of 2022. In this case, we had a power line that, because of wind, ignited fuel at the bottom of the canyon. And then because of the topography and the wind, the fire spread through the canyon really quickly. And within 1 hour, it reached the community on top. And this community actually did a pretty good job in terms of defensible space. They had a space between the houses and the edge of the canyon. They even removed some vegetation from the initial slope. They have a trail road that acted as a fire break, but still this was not enough to prevent the embers from flying from the bottom of the canyon straight on top of the houses. So even though the vegetation around the structures didn't burn, you see all of these ignitions at the gutters, at the vents on the roof, and then all of these houses were completely lost, and they all burned from the inside out. So the moral of the story, is that you need both hardening of the structure and defensible space. You basically, one doesn't prevent losses, so you need both, as Zach was mentioning earlier. And it can be pretty overwhelming to think about like the things that you can do to reduce the risk. So it's usually good to like start prioritizing your the things that are important for you. So for example, what are the structures that are more valuable for you and your business? Or what are the structures that are like older or damaged and so they could ignite more easily? So these are things that are good to prioritize your actions. And in terms of defensible space, is not just about reducing the vegetation, you know, in your area, but it's also about being strategic about where to remove the vegetation or other fuels. And also very important is to create an accessible path for emergency responders. And Zach will talk more about this in a minute. And of course, you have to have a plan of maintaining those improvements because the maintenance can take time too. So in terms of the structures, here we see an image of a house, but there are some generic concepts that apply to other structures as well. And also here, it might depend on your case, and like you might have different priorities, but in general, you want to start from the roof because it's usually the largest surface of a structure. So most of the embers will land on the roof. And where do the embers will roll? Wherever the leaves or other material on the roof goes. So they go in the gutters and they could ignite leaves that have been accumulated. Or for example, if you have a chimney or vertical intersections on the roof, those are vulnerable spots for embers. So that it's very, very important that you keep gutters and roof clean from debris or leaves, especially if you have trees close by that could lose a lot of leaves. And of course, as we saw also from the video, the other preferential spot for embers is vents. They love to go through vents. And so the good thing of vents is that they're relatively easy to replace. You can use like fire-resistant vents, but also you can retrofit your existing ones by using, for example, a metal screen that has openings of 1/8 of an inch or less. And in general, if you don't have time to replace them or like you're planning to do it for next year, it's good at least to prepare some plywood covers or metal tape to cover the vents before evacuation if you have time, because vents can really like determine the outcome of your structure. And we mentioned like the vegetation around the house or the structure. And if you have a window close by, for example, it could generate a flame that could break the glass. And in that case, the fire would spread inside the structure right away. And for windows, we usually recommend double pane windows with at least one pane that is tempered glass. But also we understand that windows can be very expensive. So again, like as in the case of vents, if you can replace them right away, it's good to at least prepare some covers of plywood or something that you can put on the windows before evacuation if you have time. And the other part, we saw how the fences can create a direct path for the fire to the structure. So if you have the fence that is attached to a wall or something, you might want to include a metal gate or a section that is non-combustible. And in general, you want to take an overview of the structure to see to try to think from the ember perspective or the flame perspective, where will be easier to ignite. Like, could be a crevice, could be an opening, could be an older deck with leaves at the bottom. So it's good to have an overview about these possible ignitions. And
yeah, and I just want to
now-
mention real quick, we're having some difficulty actually posting our links about this content to the chat. So we might have to reorg and get Dom to be a host, but we will have a PDF of all the resources that we'd like to share with you, and we'll upload that as well. So you can access that through Sched.
Right, thank you. And now, I don't know if Zach wants to add something here, otherwise we can be more specific about the agricultural structures.
Yeah, I'll bring a lot of that stuff from that previous slide into these future slides. But one thing that everyone's got to keep in mind when looking at those previous slides, which there's some great stuff on the UCCE and our website about your house preparation. And some of those slides are pulled from that, and there's great information out there. But keep in mind the things that are easy for fire department personnel, such as myself, coming out there to assist with, right? You know, the vents are a big one, because as a fire department, there's nothing we can do about those. And so inside your attic or underneath your foundation, where those vents lead to, are very, very dry, right? Because they're protected by your roof, and they have dust and all kinds of stuff that have collected there over the years. But it's also things that when the fire department is responding to a major incident, such as the Tubbs fire that someone just in the chat was just saying they were a part of, if a fire gets into one of those locations, we rarely on a major incident like that have the resources to actually attack that fire and save that structure. Usually it's one engine at best, or even a hand crew or something like that. And so those vents, those gutters, that stuff is really important, because that's the harder one. The stuff that's direct flame contact with the house, fences, for example, to be honest, as odd as that sounds, it's almost easier for us, because I can cut that fence away from your house in a matter of seconds and move on to the next house that's also being impacted. So we'll get into it more, but those vents, eave vents, foundation vents, those are very, very important. So moving on to the ag structures portion, right? The biggest thing about ag structures is, you know, there's a lot more variation in condition even than houses, because there's no one living in them. So you can have really, really fire resistant ag structures, such as the new steel buildings. And then you can have barns that are like the one in this picture here that are quite old, but there doesn't mean that they're not important to that landowner or house very important things inside them. You know, super expensive equipment or whatnot like that. And so, like Luca was kind of alluding to earlier, if there is fire that is suspected to impact your property, some of these older barns that are really susceptible to fire might not be the best place to store some of your expensive equipment. And so the ability to move those into a safer location, as sometimes as counterintuitive as it seems, is a really good idea. I've seen out in the field, I see very good results from parking, you know, equipment, anything that's expensive and your farm or ranch cannot survive without. Open spaces with, you know, if you disc a field up or get something down to soil, and like an orchard, for example, parking things in those areas is actually a lot probably safer in some cases than inside of a structure that's susceptible to fire like that. If it's a steel structure with no vents, then you're in a really good spot. You know, that's a very fire resistant building. Gutters still need to be cleaned, that kind of stuff. On that previous slide, we had a hoop house, and in some operations, hoop houses are a main part of that. You know, either out of season crop growing, or, you know, seeds or transplants, all that kind of stuff. You know, if you lose an entire hoop house, it could be catastrophic. But that being said, with those embers and the winds that are generated by these fires themselves, hoop houses are almost, they're not really possible to save. But this one here, there's very little actual fuel inside that hoop house. So once the plastic on the outside has either blown away or burned or whatever, there might actually be very little damage inside, just because there's nothing for the fire to take to continue to burn. Whenever you're preparing for wildfire, consider how fire burns, right? It's always just like your fireplace. It's going to start with the kindling, then it's going to burn the bigger stuff, and finally it'll burn the biggest. So if you remove the kindling, the grasses, the dried, the wood piles, the fine particulate at the bottom of the wood pile, you remove some of that kind of stuff, the leaves, you can actually stop that kind of fire chain reaction before it starts, which is really helpful. Embers do not ignite giant pieces of wood. They ignite grass and fine particulate and leaves, and then those things ignite the bigger stuff. If you want to push forward, Luca. So
and actually, Zach, I wanted to say there's a question in the Q&A that's related. So before we move on, and also we'll have to do it quick. But folks wondering about, thanks Josh for the question, sprinklers that folks are deploying currently, right, to create sort of a buffer for embers to intrude. And most of the data I've seen is that those are not that effective, but I'd like you to comment.
So sprinklers are not as effective as people would think. A couple reasons. So first of all, the void spaces that I just talked about, your attic and your under foundation, your roof is designed to keep water out of those places, so they never get the sprinkler that you're talking about. Gutters are helped by sprinklers quite a bit. The other problem that we see out in the field is people have set sprinklers up, but then they lose power and lose water, and those sprinklers turn off long before the fire gets there, and so they're not as effective for that reason. But yeah, if you have grass material that hasn't been able to be taken down, and you're worried about that direct contact with your house or fence, they can be very useful for wetting down the fuels around your house. On the roof, it sounds like a really good idea, but it doesn't tend to do what you hope. But if there's no reason not to, it definitely helps gutters. It helps around chimneys. It helps valleys where leaves and fine particulate collect. There's a few more chats here. Amber, you want me to?
We'll table some of those, I think, till our Q&A, if y'all don't mind. And we'll have to move on just so we can cover all the content and then come back to those. But thank you.
Yeah, and on that, my contact information is at the end of the slide. If you have any questions about how CAL FIRE and how the fire departments in your area respond and kind of the issues they see, by all means, shoot me an email. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. It might not be the same day, but I'll get right back to you. So for equipment, I kind of talked about it, but this apple orchard down here, right? Very rarely does an orchard like that even burn. Embers will blow across it. It'll, little tufts of grass will light, but very little flame damage. So if you parked equipment in that orchard, it could be very safe, and it could be much safer than in an old barn with fine particulate right up to it. Those leaves, grass, wood piles, all that kind of stuff. Upper right-hand corner, that cornfield, not a great place because that is all fine particulate. Any ember lands in there, it's going to start a fast-moving, very hostile fire. And so you really want to pull any equipment out of fields like that. The one down in the bottom right-hand corner is kind of in the middle. That's a very, with a hot enough fire, even with, kind of what's green there, that could burn pretty well. I was Napa County a couple years ago. I saw some things burn that I didn't normally see burn. So in the right conditions, that can happen. So those two on the right, I would definitely avoid. The apple orchard on the left, that'd be a great spot. If you're in the area where fires have a potential to come your way, it's depending on how your operation is run, it'd be a great idea to set aside a small portion of land and just keep that. Oh, excuse me. Sorry about that. And keep that strictly for kind of parking your expensive stuff or putting your possessions there where it's devoid of those kindling that I was talking about, the small particulate. And so even if embers do land on that stuff, it hopefully has a better chance of surviving. Equipment itself, even with oil and buildup of kind of machinery, it still has a less chance of burning than if an ember falls in grass, fine leaves, or that kind of thing. Luca, if you want to push forward. So defensible space, there's a lot of information out there, and it's very readily available. It all has to do with houses, generally speaking, and because that goes to the most folks, but it all applies to every structure on your building. That direct flame contact that Luca was mentioning will absolutely, burn down a structure. And so keeping that defensible space, and the zones, it's pretty well documented. I'm not going to go too far into it because of time, but it's very easy to Google and find the zones, and that defensible space is huge. Let's see, preventing the ignitions, that's your heavy fuels. So you want to prevent those from being close by, but they're not gonna ignite unless you have those fine fuels next to them. The one thing that doesn't come up very often about defensible space is access. So people do sometimes a great job around their homes, but do a pretty poor job along the driveway accessing their home. And so as the fire department, have no real safe way to get to the structure or away from the structure, and that can be catastrophic for any folks that live down a half a mile of driveway, have a great big compound, great vegetation management, but we just can't get there safely or out safely. Let's see. So coordinating sometimes with your local fire department is great. CAL FIRE is a statewide agency, and so sometimes it does have trouble, coordinating with specific landowners. I'll very quickly, you can coordinate with your local CAL FIRE unit and try and get some access that is specific to CAL FIRE as a whole. We have our own lock system where only the fire department has the keys, and that can be helpful if a large scale incident comes through your area. Any CAL FIRE resource responding, regardless of where they're from across the state, can and will have access to that area. Go ahead, Luca.
Yeah, you jumped the gun. That was
yeah.
The one.
I get
tips
that.
For, tips for responding. But there you go.
Okay,
and I know you didn't mention this, but we've talked about it before, which is if you have bridges, and that's a really important part of access, make sure you understand like the weight ratings, because some of those emergency responders might not be able to get close enough to help you. So yeah.
I was just actually going to get into that. Yeah. With these narrow driveways, long driveways, turnarounds are a huge problem. Small bridges are a huge problem because even if the bridge, if the landowner says, oh, we've pulled across, 100 tons, we don't know that. And the bridge looks old. And the last thing we want to do is get stuck there and have a bunch of fire folks stuck with an oncoming fire. Reflective signs are huge, and there's a large push amongst a lot of the Firewise councils and local organizations to try and push these, because with the potential for non-local folks to be responding to your area, they just don't have the local knowledge. And so really good signage for all your key information is a great idea. I've had a lot of folks ask me, why their water source didn't get used, and or some other, some road they had didn't get used. And it's because the folks from either the CAL FIRE, the federal firefighters, whoever was there, just didn't know about them. And that's just because information is very hard to get from the local fire departments to a statewide organization. So the best way to do it is for really good green, or some kind of reflective signage that we can see when we're going in there.
Yeah, and so we'll keep going because we're a tiny bit behind time, and I want to leave time for that Q&A, but we just touched briefly here on livestock as well, which is a really important piece and a growing concern. Zach, I'll let you take it first and then I'll dip in at the end.
Yeah, so there's a lot of programs out there that vary a lot county to county across the state. Listed here is a bunch of them. You know, a lot of them are systems that have been put in place by local agencies that maybe state agencies or federal agencies are less privy to. But I'm going to default back to the best way to kind of manage a large livestock operation is to, I think Amber's going to probably talk more about it, but to make sure that you have a good cooperative relationship with your neighbors. Maybe there's a spot where all of this livestock can go that is less impacted. And then the thing that I would like to push forward is that if you have the ability to join or start a local organization, Firewise councils are great, prescribed burn associations are great, that can more easily integrate with the fire ICS system. Those are usually much better received than a bunch of landowners coming to roadblocks and telling the folks there what they need to do. If there's a single point of contact with a local organization that has all the information of livestock, landowners, contacts that can integrate into our command system, that works really well.
Yeah, so that kind of touches on these mutual aid networks, like know your neighbors, have that phone tree. It's all useful for no matter what type of disaster you're facing, and just know who has your livestock trailers. We learned earlier on folks were using a local zoo because they had amazing livestock trailers, so just make sure that you have that communication. And relatedly, these ag livestock pass programs that are popping up in the counties have different requirements. Most of them have, a minimum number of different livestock per breed that you need to have to qualify, but there's also usually training requirements that go with that. And they're co-created between the Sheriff's Department, CAL FIRE, and usually a UC Extension Livestock Advisor as well. So they're pretty comprehensive. They're there to support folks, but it's not a guarantee to get back in. So we have some PDF type information that we can upload to Sketch for you about this, and then hopefully we'll be creating that into an online resource soon. I think
all these organizations, regardless of how well organized they are, will come up against the
Uh-oh, I think we lost Zach. Okay, well, we'll move to the next one. If you're ready. Zach, you can pop back in or say what you want in the chat as well.
Yeah, so we've had a lot of information thrown at us throughout this session. It's been awesome. And you might be wondering, like, where do I start, right? So thankfully, we have a lot of resources that can help you with that. We have many checklist resources for you. Some of those links will be dropped in the chat. CAFF, we've posted 2 different articles, Maneuvering Through Wildfire Evacuations and Navigating Public Safety Power Shutoffs, both of which touch on this notion of like preparing for disaster, preparing for emergency situations. And they give you helpful tips like what to put in a go bag or what kind of like how to plan an escape route. And what goes even further and in more depth is that Farmer Campus Farming Through Wildfire Season workbook. That link was dropped earlier in the chat, but we could definitely drop that again for you all. Definitely check out that workbook and go through some of those activities. It'll help you give you more of a sense of what there is to be done to prepare, and it'll guide you through that process.
And also that session was recorded. So if you have chance later, I think you could we're going to advocate for it to be on the CAFF Flix playlist for wildfire preparation. So if you don't know about CAFF Flix YouTube channel, check it out. Okay, I think that's it. And we are right there to give ourselves just enough time for some Q&A. I know there was some stuff in the chat that also got pushed over. So I just wanted to make sure folks saw that question about what's that quick and dirty, cheap, feasible way to protect your vents if you've got to go quick is like, either that mesh or aluminum foil. Super quick and easy, affordable. So definitely have those on hand or set aside for just those reasons. And this is all about farmers, right? Like let your farm workers staff, or your ranch manager type folks know about those things too, that, hey, this is my method I want to use in the event of whatever. So making sure that you have these plans and you're communicating that with all the important players that make decisions on your farm or ranch. Thanks, Dom. Yes, exactly. And then there was an additional question we didn't get to yet. I'm not sure, this might be for you, Zach. Does anyone have experience with citizens organized to prepare for emergencies, COPE? I'm not familiar with that acronym or group.
I'm not familiar with that one. Locally here, we have, it's a Civera, which is a local auxiliary, they call it. So it's a support of first responders. It's totally, I think it's run through a volunteer fire department kind of, but mostly it's just folks who want to help out. That's really a really good place to start. But in order, they don't have access to the emergency incident or the fire line, anything like that. So not that they couldn't, but they'd have to, in order to make that work well, they'd have to get a really kind of a structure with a single point of contact who could kind of come in and have all the information needed so that the folks on the ground weren't kind of bombarded by a whole bunch of people. And that would be the best way also to get, some of those ag passes implemented. But yeah, it sounds like it's another acronym for a very similar organization, and they are a great starting place for folks getting involved and also getting more information. If they turn into a Firewise counselor or a prescribed burn association, that kind of thing, it's really nice because there's funding available through a lot of grants for those kind of organizations.
Yeah, and I'll just pop in here and
RCDs are great.
Yeah, exactly. I'll say that we've been focusing on wildfire disaster type work and responses, but there are others who have that greater, umbrella of different disaster response. And if you do have livestock, Halter Project is another one to check out as well, which focuses on the specific needs of large animal movement during any kind of type of disaster. And I'll put that link in the chat. In the meantime, we have some thoughts, a question on dry hydrants filled from rainwater harvesting. CAL FIRE fundable? ? I don't know if you know the answer to that, Zach, but
there is
interesting.
I couldn't tell you yes or no exactly. There's a lot of things that are fundable through grants. You'd have to find an avenue of how to do that, and probably an organization to help you write those grants. I don't know specifically if that would be a thing. I will go back to, though, that those things are, I've run across a lot of them. They are chronically underused unless they're well signed and everyone can see them.
And one thing that I wanted to add is that with the UC Cooperative Extension, we recently launched a survey for wildfire preparedness and impact, and especially like if you've been impacted by the fire insurance that like skyrocketed or something, like I'm dropping the link in the chat, and feel free to take the survey and will help us understanding what to do.
Awesome. Thanks, y'all. I just got a little glitch in our survey real quick. I'm reopening it, but in the meantime, feel free to pop any additional questions in the chat. I believe we have until 3:45 here to answer those types of questions, or if you wanted us to elaborate on any of these particular points. As I mentioned, we do have this YouTube channel where we've got a longer version of this presentation, but your survey results and feedback really helps us tailor, again, as we're moving through the development of this content, to make sure that it's really applicable for the farmers and ranchers, but also for rural ag communities. We know, farmers and ranchers don't farm in a void, right? They're part of this larger fabric. And so that's where that mutual aid and making sure you're having those conversations and kind of have those shared docs with shared gate codes or whatever it might be, so that you can share those resources when the time comes. Really important.
Question here in the chat about shipping containers. Generally speaking, they do very, very good in fires, but a lot of times folks put them in places where there's a lot of brush and a lot of heavy fuels that go up right against them. And then what'll happen is that radiant heat will ignite the things inside those containers. If they're out in an open area by themselves, they do very good. Looks like there's some good information from Marin, the area of Marin, and then Santa Rosa Fire, I guess, has a relationship with the COPE. Someone in the chat was saying, I think that's going to be a county by county local. I assume it's a local organization, and they're going to have relationship with their local folks, and it's a great place to start.
I see some comments related to like the funding. I feel that there's plenty of funding possibilities depending on the situation, but of course, like it depends on the specific situation. So you might want to reach out to even cooperative extension advisors can help.
And the funding is difficult to get sometimes, unless you are like I said, part of a Firewise, you know, that have kind of access to those grant writing capabilities, have a nonprofit set up, and have a capability to accept that funds. And so that's sometimes the hardest part for an individual, where individuals have very hard times accessing funds, where if you are part of one of these programs, it becomes a lot easier.
But it is a good idea to like work with your neighbors and community to like, you know, submit a plan together and get funding and yeah, make the whole
Definitely.
community resilient and not just one single property.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you're only as safe as the people around you, right? So you can do everything you want on your own little individual bubble, but we still know, you know, wind-driven fire, right? Like you need 18 meters between stuff for that flame contact piece. So definitely what other folks are doing around you is going to affect your vulnerability as well. And yeah, it's called a sponsoring agency. So if you're an individual, you know, and you're not like a nonprofit or a government entity, you'll need somebody that sponsors you on some of those like state related or grants. But there are others. I just want to briefly mention that CAFF last year ran a wildfire fund and gave out nearly $200,000 to farmers, you know, across the state that have been impacted. And we do similar things with storms recently, drought. So just if you're not already connected, get on our subscribe to the newsletter, and also you'll get notifications for when those things are opening and closing. Get familiar with our emergency fund website, which we can also pop in the chat there too. I think I owe a beer every time I say pop in the chat.
And in the resources, you can also find the UC Cooperative Extension website where we cover like kind of like all the wildfire related issues before the fire and after the fire. And also on our Facebook page, we're like promoting content and like creating new content for different communities. So you're going to find the links in the resources I'm going to send out.
Exactly. Yeah, we'll send a PDF with all that good jazz. Awesome. I know we're kind of closing up on time here. Anything else coming through for folks? Maybe we missed something in there. Chat's on fire. We got to use our pun, our favorite pun. All right. Well, thanks, y'all. This has been a pleasure, and we hope to continue that conversation. And if you didn't know, we also cover some of this content through things like podcasts. So we have the Farmer's Beat, that's like the vegetable, and you can get it on, you know, your Spotify or iTunes. So if you like to get your content that way while you're seeding trays or milking goats, whatever you're doing out there, we're going to reach you somehow. All right. Excellent. Thanks, y'all. Please take the survey.
Thank
Okay.
you very much.
Thank you,
Thank you.
host.
Thank you.